When it comes to saving versus splurging on art supplies, people on the internet have a lot of feelings. As in, they have very strong opinions about where you should save your hard-earned money and where you should spend as if you have an unlimited budget. And the thing is that I don't think anyone's right or wrong when it comes to this. There's just personal preference. However, it can be enormously helpful when you're going out into the world to buy your own art supplies, knowing exactly where your hard-earned money is going. So in this video, I am going to be breaking down 5 different categories of art supplies where I personally think that you should save, where I think that you should splurge, but I'll also be breaking down the differences between budget and higher end products so you can make an informed decision. Now, if we haven't met before, my name is Marianne. I'm an artist and educator, and I teach painting on my channel. I've been teaching painting for over a decade, and I started when I was a broke student, so I know a thing or two about stretching a dollar. Now that I'm painting professionally, I can absolutely tell you that some of my art supplies are worth the premium price tag, while others are not. But before we start, I just want to stress that the most important thing you can do is to just make art, even if you are on a total budget and all you can afford is a piece of paper and a pencil. It is way better to just get started and use what you have on hand. I once went to a Modigliani exhibit, and he often used to draw or paint on cardboard because that was all he could get his hands on. So do not let a lack of funds hold you back from being creative. The most important thing is to just start. Let's get started. We are going to start things off with canvases, and I don't really paint on panels, so we are going to be focusing on canvases today. Canvases are the foundation of your painting. Without a canvas, you don't have a painting. So let's break down the different parts of a canvas, why one might be cheaper and why one might be more expensive. The canvas has 2 different parts essentially. So first, let's look at the cloth of a canvas. Most canvases are cotton, while some higher end canvases might be linen. If you're going for a nicer, higher end canvas, it should also say cotton duck on it, or 100% cotton duck. Now, I was once contacted by an artist saying, look, I can't buy this canvas because there's duck in it and I'm allergic to poultry. And I had to reassure her there's not actually any duck in a cotton duck canvas. It's just an anglicized version of the word doek, which is a Dutch word which means durable fabric. So let's compare a less expensive canvas to a more expensive canvas and where you'll see the most amount of differences. This is a less expensive canvas from Michaels that came in a pack and was manufactured overseas. This is a more expensive canvas from Apollon Gottrick, which was manufactured in Quebec, Canada. Now this canvas I've already primed and prepared with gesso, and I've explained my whole process in a different video, which I will link below and up in the little card here. But we can still talk about the differences in the cloth. In the save version of this, it's rougher, it doesn't quite feel as tense, and it just feels thinner compared to the more expensive version. On the splurge side, this one just feels thicker. The tension is also really nice, so even if I push on the back, it's not going to leave finger dents. Whereas if I do that on the cheaper version, it's really obvious. I don't know if you can see that on camera. Just by running my hands over these, this one feels more stretchy and more inclined for my brush to push in on it, whereas this one has better resistance, better tension, and as a result will be a much better painting experience. Now there's another part of the canvas that we should discuss, and that's the frame itself. These are both regular profile frames, which means that they are on the thinner side, but even the thinner version of the more expensive canvas is a bit thicker. The other difference is that the frame on the cheaper canvas has likely not been kiln dried. This one actually specifies that the frame has been kiln dried. When you have kiln dried frames, it basically means that it's going to be resistant to warping. If you live somewhere like me that's humid in the summer but very dry in the winter, what can happen is that if the wood has not been properly dried in advance, it can actually warp. So if your frame warps, what's going to happen is that it's actually going to twist and torque your painting, which is not good and frankly doesn't look professional. So because of this, I'm going to be putting canvases firmly into the splurge section. Make sure whenever you buy a canvas that it specifically states that it is 100% acid free. Sometimes cheaper canvases can have acid in them because it's less expensive to bleach the fabric with acid as opposed to using real quality gesso. So if you do decide to save on your canvas, just make sure that it outright states that it is acid free. That way you don't have to worry about your painting's colors slowly being eaten away from the underside because there was acid in your canvas. Now let's talk about brushes. Here's a basic breakdown of the anatomy of a brush. First, we've got the bristles, which is right here at the top, and that's what you paint with. Then we've got the ferrule, which is the metal part of the brush that attaches the bristles to the handle. And then of course, we've got the handle. Brushes can unfortunately be ridiculously expensive. And more than once, I've gotten confused when I've gone to the brush section of an art store, loaded up on brushes, gotten to the checkout, and got absolute sticker shock because I was not expecting them to cost so much. So let's break down the differences between a cheaper brush and a more expensive brush. On more expensive brushes like this one by Silver, they tend to hold their shape better. The bristles don't tend to shed as much, and the glue that they use to attach the ferrule to the handle tends to be really, really good. So you don't get that annoying wobbling or having the brush head suddenly come flying off when you're in the middle of a painting. Now, these kinds of more expensive brushes also tend to have a much longer lifespan, as in if you take care of them and maintain them, then they can last you for years and years and years. So even though they are an investment, they will last you a very long time. However, here's some of the problems that I have with more expensive brushes. This brush was about $40 Canadian. It was a huge splurge, and I frankly never use it. I don't know if any of you out there are like this, where if you buy something really nice, you're actually kind of afraid to use it because you don't want to ruin it, but I fall into that category. So now you're probably wondering, okay, so does she think this is a save or a splurge? For me personally, when it comes to brushes, I'm going to park that in the save category. Again, a lot of professional artists will probably call me out on this and say, no, your brush is so important, but hear me out. When it comes to my brushes, I'm actually quite rough on them. I use them to blend, I push hard, I often don't do the best job cleaning them, and as a result, I actually prefer to work with cheaper brushes, especially because as they age, they splay. And when they splay, I can actually use those bristles for different functions. For example, this is actually my favorite paintbrush. I think I've had it for probably as long as I've been painting. It is a Simply Simmons, and once upon a time it was a Filbert, but at this point in its life, it is fully splayed, and it is perfect for blending. Like, this brush has no shape to it whatsoever. If you were to ask me whether it had been a round or a filbert originally, I'd be like, I don't know. All I know is that I just kind of push it and I swirl it around, and as a result, this kind of brush is fantastic for blending. I really like the Simply Simmons brand. It is on the more affordable side. Same with Royal Langnickel. I have a ton of their Zen brushes. And then on the higher end, I like using Silver brushes. So if you're just starting out and you can't afford to spend 30 to 40 to 50 or higher on a brush, don't worry, you can just go to the dollar store instead. And to me, there's not that big of a difference. Now you might be saying, but Marianne, those dollar store brushes are terrible because the top of the brush is always detaching from the handle. But this happens to higher end brushes too, and the fix is remarkably simple. All you're gonna do is that you're gonna get this little jar of Gorilla Glue and you're going to reattach the brush. If any of your favorite brushes, low or high end, have become wobbly or fully detached and you're just sticking them back on and hoping they'll stay, just pull them off, even if they're wobbly, add some of this super glue to it, jam the top back on, hold it for 30 seconds, and you'll be good to go. Also, if you're enjoying this video, I would love if you would check out some of the free resources that I've made available for artists, which include a 7-day sketchbook challenge and an acrylic and oil painting ebook. So check them out in the description below. Now let's talk about sketchbooks. Every single time I post a sketchbook video, whether it's on Instagram or YouTube or wherever, I always get the same question: what sketchbook is that? So let's take a look at the key ingredients of what makes a good sketchbook and whether you should save or splurge. I have a few different sketchbooks with me. This is my 6-year-old's and these two are my own. Let's use this one as an example. So let's look at the different parts of a sketchbook and what makes a good one. For the cover, you can do hard or soft. I personally prefer hard, even though it's a little bit heavier, just because I feel like it's a bit more durable. Then we've got the paper, and this is the most important part. The sketchbook that I'm showing you is a Strathmore watercolor paper book, and as a result, it has very thick, heavy paper, which can handle any kind of paint that I throw at it. So whether I'm using watercolor, which it was designed for, or acrylic, which is what I'm actually using in this book, I know that the pages are going to be able to hold their shape. They're not going to buckle. And last, we have the binding. The binding is the glue, and sometimes it's actually a string that's been woven into the paper to keep it held in place. When you have a more expensive sketchbook, the binding tends to be higher quality. The glue is better, the binding is tighter, and you're not going to lose pages. Let's take a look at the less expensive option, which is kind of cute. If all you're planning to use this for is dry media, things like colored pencils or charcoals or graphite, then this is actually a great option and you don't really need anything more. And it's fine that the pages are quite thin and flimsy. If you don't need the thicker paper because you're using dry media, then don't pay a premium for it. Now this book is definitely showing the wear a little bit more, and it's not just because it's a kid's sketchbook, it's because it's not quite as durable. As well, I don't necessarily trust the binding as much, and I do feel like the pages could fall out. This is the Artist Loft sketchbook from Michaels. It's super affordable, but if all you're doing is going to be drawing in pencils or other dry media, you could easily go to the dollar store and be just fine. If, however, you are planning to paint in your sketchbooks, which is what I like to do, then you're going to want to go in the higher end. So you might be wondering, okay, Marianne, are you save or splurge? This one is actually split. When it comes to dry media, you can save. When it comes to wet media, like any kind of paint, whether it's acrylic, oil, or watercolor, you are going to want to splurge. Let's look at some of the higher end products. So in my Strathmore watercolor journal, this has cold press paper, which means that the pages are a little bit dimpled, there's some texture, and it's really, really great for watercolors. Next time, I think I'm actually going to test out the Stillman & Birns Zeta series, which has hot press paper, so it's a smooth application. Now this book has acrylic ink and gouache on top, but next time I do an acrylic or an oil sketchbook, I think I'm actually going to test this out because I want to see how the hot press or smooth paper also functions. Both of these books have an incredibly high paper weight. They are very good quality and they are worth the expensive price tag. So depending on what part of the world you are buying these books from, when I did some research, I saw that you can get this book in the States for about $30 US. However, when I import them to Canada, they're usually about $60, so I try and wait for a sale or for a drop in price before I go out and buy a bunch of them. Same with the Strathmore. Even though these aren't cheap, especially if you are painting in them, you are going to want a really high quality paper that's not going to buckle or bend on you, and these are excellent books. You will not regret them. The Strathmore Watercolor Journal is less expensive, and you can typically find it at most retailers around the world. Again, this video isn't sponsored. I just really love Strathmore and Stillman & Birn, and either one would be a great choice if you like to paint on paper. Now let's talk about studio furniture, or things like easels and palettes. I'm just gonna spoil the surprise. This is firmly in the save category. You are going to see out there all of these easels and pieces of studio equipment for thousands of dollars that have things like counterweights and wheels and pulleys, and I'm telling you, for the vast majority of us, that is completely and totally unnecessary. So I figured what I would do for this category is just take you through my own studio and show you a bunch of the equipment that I use. This is an artist butcher's tray, and it's about $20 to $30, and I use this for my acrylic paints to keep them workable for hours. But the thing is that you can get the exact same effect by going to your local thrift store, spending a couple bucks, and grabbing a baking sheet. As long as you line it with wet paper towels and throw a wax sheet of paper on top, you're good. Now, when I'm working on my sketchbooks and I want to angle them towards me, I have this little table easel that's got all these different notches in it so that I can choose my angle. And this is where I position my sketchbook when I'm working so that I'm looking at it directly. This was only about $30 US, and I picked it up on Amazon. Now, if I'm working at my desk and want to remain seated, then I'll often use this table easel, which I picked up for about $50 US on Amazon, and it's fully adjustable, so it can go up or it can come down, and this part goes up or down too to lock in the painting. This kind of easel is amazing if you prefer working at your desk, and I will often use this for many of my smaller pieces. For larger paintings, I'm actually going to bring this easel forward. This is what's known as an H-frame easel because it looks like an H compared to an A-frame easel, which comes up like this. I love the fact that this easel is actually fully collapsible and that I can fold it up and stick it in a corner when I'm not using it because my studio is super tiny and I need every square foot of space that I can get. I also love the fact that since it's not expensive, I can kind of ruin it and it doesn't matter. I can also make these little adjustments and hacks on it, such as adding this little piece of trim here, which folds down and then stops on top of a screw. And what I'll do when I'm painting in oil is that I'll actually stick a roll of paper towel onto this and I'll wipe my brush as I'm working. But I would so not feel comfortable doing this kind of adjustment on a $2,000 easel. Some of the more expensive easels that you're going to pay thousands of dollars for have all of these fancy counterweights and knobs and little levers and dials that you can use in order to seamlessly move your paintings around, which is really convenient if you're working on very large paintings and you need to be able to just maneuver the painting around depending on what section you're working on. But for me personally, unless I were to get a much larger studio which could house one of those larger contraptions, an easel like this works just fine for me. This one I picked up for about $120 Canadian, so I want to say that's about $90 US. But the point is that your easel does not need to have all of the whistles and bells. It just needs to be good enough. Just to give you an idea of how little I care about how fancy my studio furniture is, I have to show you this palette holder. So this is my absolutely hacked together palette holder. I don't even know what this thing is. If someone knows, could you let me know in the comments? Because I have no idea. It was given to me, and even though it's height adjustable, I never touch it. And what I've done is I've just screwed on a piece of plywood with little pieces of trim, and I will put my palette here. And sometimes when I used to oil paint, I would actually have little dollops of paint around the edge. I don't really do that anymore, but when I am painting at the big easel, what I'll do is I'll have this right beside me and I'll put the palette in there. But again, I hacked this together using spare pieces of wood from Home Depot and this discarded piece of furniture. So you definitely don't need to be fancy. You just need something that works for you. I want to say that this whole thing probably cost me 15 bucks. So next time you're in the art store and you're noticing all these easels and beautiful pieces of studio furniture with massive price tags, just remember you don't need them to have a professional quality setup. And if budget is a significant issue but you don't want to paint on a table, you can also grab one of these cheap little aluminum stand easels that cost like 15 bucks. They're available from most retailers and it is a little bit of a step up from working on a table. Which brings us to paint. For me personally, this is the one category that I'm going to get super passionate and fired up on, and I'm going to put it firmly into the splurge category. Here's why. Back when I was first starting as an artist, I used to use student grade paint. And what I'm about to show you is the very first acrylic painting that I ever did. And it might make you sick to your stomach because I'm also going to show what this looked like originally before it happened. Here it is, my green owl. You might be wondering, why is that painting green? Because I certainly did not paint it this way. This painting is green because I used a red that was fugitive. A fugitive paint color is a paint color that fades over time, and red is notoriously fugitive. So when I was painting that piece, and I didn't realize that I had a fugitive red on my hands until I looked at the painting on the wall a few months later and went, I think it's turning green. And it was. The only reason I even figured it out was because I had done a few other paintings at that time and had also used that same red, and they were also turning green. The reason that I am so committed to switching to artist grade paints as soon as you are financially able to do so is because they are archival, which means that they have been tested extensively and won't fade. So you are not going to wind up with a green owl the way that I did. So even though for me, paint is a non-negotiable and it goes into the splurge category, let's look at the difference between a student grade paint and an artist grade paint. Student grade paints typically have a lower pigment load, which means that they actually have less color in them than some of the more expensive ones. The pigments that are within those paints are also typically synthetic. So if it says that it's a cobalt or a cadmium, typically it's a synthetic imitation of what that actual pigment is, whereas the higher grade artist quality paints actually use those pigments and those ingredients. Another difference you might notice between student grade and artist grade is the consistency. Student grade paints are typically very smooth, but they don't actually have a lot of weight to them, whereas artist grade paints typically are thicker and a little bit goes a long way. Now let's look at the price tags. This cheaper cadmium yellow medium will run you about $3 or $4 depending on where you are. This tube of cadmium yellow medium will be much more expensive because this is a series 3. Artist grade paints are ranked by series in terms of how pricey they are. Typically, the lower the series number, the cheaper the paint. Paint colors that are inexpensive to manufacture, like burnt umber or titanium white, tend to be less expensive. Colors such as cadmium yellow medium, which use actual cadmium, tend to be more expensive. As a result, you're probably paying 3 to 5 times more for this tube of paint versus this tube of paint. However, I do think it's worth it. At first glance, you might look at the two different sizes here and go, whoa, this one costs 3 to 5 times less and I get so much more? What a bargain! But less is more when it comes to artist grade paints. As I mentioned before, this one has less pigments and the pigments are typically synthetic. That means you actually need a lot more of this paint in order to achieve the same result that you might get from this paint in the first shot. This paint has better opacity, better coverage, a little bit travels a lot further, and the pigment load is higher, meaning that you actually need less of this in your mixes in order for it to change the color. I typically have these smaller tubes of paint for years while I burn through these tubes of paint when I'm teaching acrylics in larger groups. Same thing goes for oil. When you have a cheaper or student grade oil, they typically use more oil, less pigment, and the pigments that they use tend to be synthetic. Whereas when you switch to the artist grade oils, you get less oil, more pigment, better consistency, and just an overall better painting experience. Now, if you're interested in artist grade paints, but the idea of swapping out your entire palette just seems overwhelming, don't worry. There's a few ways that you can get started with them. The first is to just slowly replace your tubes of paint with artist grade paint. Or you can actually start with lower series numbers. You can easily swap out titanium white, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and those three will give you a solid foundation, and they tend to be less expensive than other colors such as reds and yellows. Again, just keep an eye out for the series number, as that will indicate to you whether they are more expensive or less expensive. Now, if all you can afford as an artist is the student grade brand, when it comes to acrylic, I have used the Liquitex Basics a lot, and it's absolutely fine. So just use what you can, where you can, and upgrade whenever you can. So if you like this video, you should definitely check out this one where I teach you how to prepare your canvases, or this one where I teach you how to paint on paper with acrylic into a sketchbook. Thank you so much for watching, and happy painting!